Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming out on Friday night for the Seattle Indies speaker series. We have two great talks tonight for you with Paul here with his retrospective about Grapplers Relic Rivals that you might have seen and played at 6 this year, earlier back in September. And then we have the talk about Choo Choo Charles and what it was like with that game going viral and everything that came out of that. Coleman will be leading that discussion, and you're free to ask questions at the end whenever you have time for questions. I want to welcome everybody to M5 Creative. This is a building that the city of Seattle owns now and is an arts collective for people who are interested. If you have hot desks and desks that you can rent monthly, you can speak to Leslie at the front. Interested, they do tours here every Friday at noon. James Miles, who runs the place, will take you around and show you all the cool stuff they got going on with film production and VR experiences and the big LED wall that you might have seen out in the front when you came in. There's a lot of cool stuff going on here, so definitely check it out if you're looking for a place to work with other creatives in the area. Seattle Indies, we are a nonprofit organization that builds community and runs events for game developers in the greater Seattle area. If this is your first time at a Seattle Indies event, then welcome. And if it's not, then welcome back, and glad to see everybody here tonight. Check out our website, seattleoldies.org, for all of our latest events and news. Join our Discord to keep in touch with the fine folks that we meet here tonight. And the next big event that we have coming up is our holiday party on December 8th, Sunday at GameWorks downtown. It's a great night. It's $50, all you can eat, drink, games you can play. So it'll be a lot of fun to see everybody there and to celebrate the year that we've had. If you don't mind, please remember to silence your devices during the talks so we don't have any interruptions. And I'll hand it over to Paul to take it away.
Between the power outages and stuff, I might not have had as much time to polish this, so I apologize in advance for that. But it's been kind of crazy out there. But it's nice that I was actually able to at least get this presentation off my computer. That was nice. I'm Paul Kankiewicz. I'm in a game called Grapplers Relic Rivals, and I'm going to be going over how the project went and hopefully some tips to maybe help you guys out on your projects. So here's just kind of an overview of the talk. Start with just an introduction of who am I. Then I'll go into just kind of an overview of Grapplers Relic Rivals, the design, the project goals, and the development, just so that we're kind of all on the same page of what we're talking about here. I'll talk about some lessons that I learned. I have a background in AAA, and so some things that I learned making an indie game and how that's different. I'll go over some Grapplers Relic Rivals, just kind of like news coverage and sales data and some challenges that the project hit along the way. And then also I'll go over some lessons that I learned working in AAA that might also apply to indie games and indie projects. And we can have some time for Q&A at the end. So here I am, Paul Kankiewicz again. I was a technical and mission designer. I worked at BioWare, Monolith, and Avalanche. I am now an indie game dev. I started an indie game studio last year when I left AAA. I went to DigiPen and graduated in 2011 with a programming degree. And I also have a QA background at Monolith Games, Microsoft, and Foundation 9 Entertainment, which I don't think is even around anymore, but worked there for a bit. And basically, I have a very good depth or breadth of different disciplines in the industry. I also have more than 30 years of gaming experience, so basically, these are some of the games that I worked on the design side. So Shadow of Mordor, Shadow of War, both of those DLCs. I worked on a lot of the main and side missions of the game. And I also worked on some things like collectibles. And then I worked on Hogwarts Legacy when Monolith kind of worked with Avalanche Software to sort of like help out the game during its development. And then I moved to BioWare, where I worked at Dragon Age Dreadwolf. Worked as a technical designer there, where I worked on a lot of the sort of objects the player interacts with, whether it was a lever, an elevator, or a cool arcane thing that the player explodes. I also worked, as I mentioned, in QA. So these are some of the games that I worked on in QA. But we're here today to talk about Grapplers Relic Rivals, obviously. So this is just kind of a screenshot of the game, so you can kind of get an idea. It's a very Towerfall Ascension-y type game, also similar to Smash Bros. If you haven't played Towerfall. So Grapplers Relic Rivals is an insanely chaotic PvP platformer with grappling hooks. It was released in June of this year, and it was made in Game Maker Studio. And so, again, just so that we're on the same page, I'll go over some of the design features of the game. So the main objective of the game is to collect coins that spawn randomly throughout the stages. Also, periodically throughout the game, throughout the matches, chests will spawn that contain powerful relics. These relics can do really different things. So there are like defensive relics, like the bubble shield that will, when you get hit, it'll pop, it'll soak the damage for you, and then it'll reform after a bit. There are also offensive relics, like a flame wreath that'll surround you and as you move into enemy. Players, so you have to kind of be careful when you stole a relic from somebody. You could damage enemies in multiple different ways. Jumping on them was the main way, but you could also, if you hit them with the grappling hook when they didn't have a relic, you would deal damage to them. And then, as I mentioned, there were various relics that dealt damage, just they were offensive relics that did that. So, for example, like you might spawn a plant turret that would shoot at your enemies. There are also traps that were placed throughout each level. So these would be things like spike traps that would constantly activate and deactivate, or swinging axe traps, or turrets that would constantly shoot at the nearest enemy. And then if you died, you would respawn at your sarcophagus after like 10 seconds or so, because I don't like games where players are completely taken out of the game. So this allowed players to constantly be engaged, constantly care about what's going on in the game, and for there to never be like a clear winner. I didn't mention this on this slide, but also when you defeated an enemy, they would explode into a coin explosion of coins. So that would kind of create a design of having the players constantly going after the player that's in the lead to create the biggest explosion of coins and kind of even the odds. I had a few goals that I set at the start of the project. I find this to be extremely important when you're starting a project to actually have some sort of goal in mind, whether that's I care about actually like, sales for a lot of people, or this can be things like I'm trying to learn something, or maybe you just have an idea for a game that this is your hobby game and you're just trying to put some cool art out into the world. So some goals for Grapplers Relic Rivals. I found a lot of information online that was like, hey, it's really important when starting a game to start very small. Now, I had a AAA background. I had done lots of programming and QA and design and stuff, but even moving into the indie space, that's different than, say, working on a AAA team where you have a basically unlimited budget and tons of people. So I knew that I wanted to start small on this game. My intention for making this game was to learn everything that I needed to make my next much bigger game succeed. So I knew I wanted to make this really big, like 2+ year long game, but I didn't want to start there because there were so many things that I didn't know about the indie space, like marketing and working with streamers and that sort of thing that I wanted to learn before I spent all the time basically fail often, right? I wanted to start on a small project that if I had completely messed up, it's like, whatever, that was just a small thing. So kind of with the start small thing, I wanted to ship a game in about 6 months, which was extremely ambitious, and I knew this going into it. So I knew that it was okay if that kind of slid a little bit, but I wanted to basically only spend a small amount of time creating this first game and learning everything that I could. I also knew that I wanted to work with an artist and a sound designer. Again, I had worked with different aspects of different like artists and such in the AAA space, but finding an artist and a sound designer and then working with them in the indie space is very different than having like producers and everyone working in the AAA space. I started with the idea of, hey, I'm going to make this game with a $4,000 budget. Turns out after looking into like how much artists and sound designers cost to contract, that ended up being a very unrealistic goal. So I very quickly changed that to, okay, let's figure out what will work for a budget there. And $10,000 seemed about within the right range for me for a goal there. And very importantly, I had no sales expectations. So I knew going into this, if this game didn't sell at all, that was totally fine. My intent, again, was to learn anything that I could that would then help my next bigger game succeed. So I'm going to go into how the game kind of came about. So it started in 2014, 2016, somewhere around there. A friend of mine constantly had friends over, and we would play all sorts of different party games. So games like Towerfall Ascension, Spider Heck, Ultimate Chicken Horse, Smash Bros, Johann Sebastian Joust, all these different party games, and it was a blast. And so I wanted to create a game that sort of paid homage to those times that we had together. I knew that I wanted to make a platformer. I love platformers, played tons of them, but I know that lots of people don't necessarily enjoy playing platformers, or they find them very frustrating. So I decided, okay, what if I added a grappling hook that would allow the player to just point in a direction and then go there? So that sort of came about to help with accessibility. And then as I playtested the game, as I mentioned, like players wanted to be able to do something more with that grappling hook. So I added various interactions, such as when you hit a player, you can steal a relic. The grappling hook will also block projectiles and other players' grapplers, so you can use that as like a defense mechanism mechanic. And then you can also activate certain traps with the grappling hook, cause those traps to then hit other players. And so basically, as I playtested, I found that there were different interactions that players wanted with the grappling hook. I then knew going into it that because I wanted to make a game similar to Ultimate Chicken Horse, that I wanted various traps that I added around the different levels. So I started kind of brainstorming the different traps, adding them around the levels, and that then made the levels feel very unique because depending on which traps were in a level, it would play very differently. After a little bit of playtesting, I noticed that players would mainly just sort of stay in one location, kind of jump on each other, then one would die, and then they'd go back and respawn in their sarcophagus, and it would just become this really very much like clumps of small combats, and that wasn't really what I wanted for the game. I wanted players actually moving around the level, interacting with each other and the traps and stuff like that. So I ended up adding coins as the victory condition to get players moving around the level, and that worked super well. As soon as I added that, I saw players actually, like they would fight for a little bit, and then they'd realize, oh, we're actually trying to get coins to win. So that would get them moving around the level, which would then get them interacting with the traps and the relics and everything like that. Then I added chests and relics, which would also make them move around even more because it's like, oh, there's now a power-up over there. Okay, I can get that. That's very important. And then they'd start like grabbing them from each other. And if you like hit a relic while it's like cancel somebody's grappler while they're stealing a relic, that relic will just sort of hang there. And so again, it would be things that would start getting players to move around the level. And then I did like it's not the show and tell, but one of the Seattle Indies events where we just kind of talk about the game design and ask for ideas. And Paxton actually said, hey, what if you had this like character select tutorial where players sort of learn the mechanics so that you didn't have to learn those mechanics while you're like in the heat of battle, that sort of thing. And that was a brilliant idea. I had also played a game called Duck Game where they did a very similar thing. So I added this character select tutorial, which is the image on the screen, where players can sort of learn the main mechanics of the game. It has like walls that you can grapple onto. It has the non-grappleable surfaces, which are those metal things. It has like coins that you can get, but you can only get those if you do the grapple, like you hold onto a wall, grapple, and then jump from there, which is a mechanic in the game that players just weren't getting. But doing this allowed players to actually learn that in a much safer environment where they could kind of explore with the different mechanics. And so now I can go into the different lessons that I learned while developing this game. Lesson 1 is doing market research. So, you've heard of it before, but I always was like, market research, whatever, I'll just make a good game. That'll be fine. If I make a good enough game, players will flock to it and everything will be fine, right? No, that's wrong. So first of all, before starting your project, it's important to think of what sort of games will sell well. And so definitely doing that research and looking into the types of genres or, the sizes of the games or the mechanics of the games that people are playing. And also having a sort of target audience in mind really helps to get your project. It basically does the marketing for you if you have something that people already want. But I also find it important to temper this with your expertise and interests. So like, I'm not a big fan of 4K games, but 4K games apparently sell really well. But if I were making a 4K game, I just wouldn't be able to do it justice. I wouldn't be interested in it. I'd probably hit burnout, that sort of thing. And so that's really not a good fit for me specifically. So definitely when you're doing your market research, think about what sort of things you want to make, what sort of games you've played, what sort of games you enjoy, and try to make something in that vein. I'm definitely not the person to ask about market research. I don't know a lot about this sort of marketing like strategies and that sort of thing. But how to market a game is the #1 resource that I've heard tons of indie people mention. So I highly suggest looking into that. I think it's just one guy that like kind of puts out videos and blog posts and stuff like that on various marketing things. He does some really deep dives into the data. He digs through Steam's stuff. And I think every either year or quarter, he puts out lots of information on like, here are the games that are now like people are flocking to. So definitely look into that. And then SteamDB is a site that will just let you dig through tons of information on Steam and what players are playing right now. And then also certain genres, like similar to how certain genres do really well, certain genres also do pretty poorly. So for example, I made a 2D platformer, local multiplayer PvP game, and like any one of those things is not the game to make. So definitely, again, do this research before you start your project and tailor those also to your project goals, right? If you're interested in making money, then this is really important. If you're just making a game to make a game, doesn't matter so much, right? Lesson #2 is contact press and streamers early. I thought that you could just kind of make a game and then like maybe a week before you release, send it to a couple streamers and they'd be like, oh yeah, I'm just sitting here waiting to play a game. Yeah, of course, awesome, I can play your game. Yeah, again, not true at all. They're super busy people. They often don't respond because they're so busy and they have other things that they're doing. So definitely do your research. Look into streamers that fit your game because there are certain streamers that are like, I only like RPG games, for example. And definitely contact them, I would say like 1 to 2 months before your big updates. So things like, and this will depend on your milestone and your project and all that, but alpha and beta, your demo release, launching, obviously. And then even major updates that you have after launch, you can still contact those streamers and be like, hey, I'm going to be releasing a single player mode for my game. Would you like to check this out? Sometimes they'll be like, hell yeah, I'll check that out. And especially if they've already covered your game before, I feel like that's a sort of more incentive to have them cover it again. When you send out these emails to streamers, just include a Steam key. It costs you nothing. You can just generate Steam keys for free on Steam. And it basically reduces the friction to them actually covering your game. If they don't have to ping you back and say, hey, could I have yes, I'd like a key or something like that. And also sometimes they'll just have those emails sitting in their inbox. They'll hit a downtime where they don't have things to cover, and then they'll go back through those. And if they already have the Steam key, they can just play it and cover your game. And I also really encourage you to ping them again if you don't get a response. Again, they're very busy. Sometimes they just don't see your email. This happened with me where I pinged Stumped, which I'll talk about later, and they didn't respond initially. Then I pinged them again after, don't be annoying. I pinged them again after a couple weeks or a month or something like that. And then they did end up actually covering the game. So you can actually use this to get more responses than without messaging them again. And maybe they just, again, didn't have time that first time. Number 3, choose a target resolution early. So this is something I knew about resolution. I knew that it was important. I knew that there were different resolutions and different aspect ratios and all that sort of stuff. But I didn't know that you had to have a specific target resolution in mind when you're creating your art and when you're sort of upscaling your game window. And it's super, super important. So this resolution needs to divide evenly into common screen resolutions. So some of the more common ones are 640 by 360 or 480 by 270, which then scale up into 1920 by 1080. And you also have to maintain the aspect ratio. So for example, 16 by 9 or 4 by 3, depending on what you're targeting. I think also ultra wides are a little different. So definitely look into that. And if you don't have this, like I did, you need to redo all your in-game values. So this is things like move speed, tile size, like grapple length, for example, for me, gravity. All these things have to be readjusted if you then have to retrofit a target resolution into that, which is something that I had to do. And this took a lot of effort and time. I was very fortunate, again, that I started on a very small project, because if I had done this, if I had gone 2 years and then gotten real art to replace my temp art, that would have been so much more work than on this just 6-month or 8-month game that I made. Lesson number 4, make your launch day the biggest that you can. So I think this is pretty obvious. People know this, but I can go into some details that maybe you didn't know. So for example, Steam has this popular upcoming list. As far as I could tell, so Steam algorithm is pretty complex and very arcane, and people just kind of, I think, they do a lot of research, but they also kind of guess a lot on this. But from the best that I could tell, basically the popular upcoming is based on wishlist amounts, and it's based on the number of wishlists that each game has on the launch day. So the general idea is that you want 7,000 to 10,000 wishlists before you launch your game to actually hit this page. That can be a little variable. Again, if nothing's coming out on that day, nothing major anyway, you'll have a higher chance of hitting this. So that's why everybody says, you want to maybe change your launch date if something big is coming out on your same day. Obviously, you want to have a launch trailer. You want to do social media posts, especially leading up to your game so that people know about it. And then even once you launch, you want to continue that to make sure that people know about it. I've always heard that if you're doing marketing and you don't feel like you're being annoying, you're doing marketing wrong. So definitely make sure to constantly, especially around your launch, to tell people and make sure to get the word out. You want to get 10 reviews as soon as possible. So I didn't know this going into it, but when you release a game on Steam that doesn't have 10 reviews, or until the game gets 10 reviews, it's more or less invisible on Steam. So people can get to it directly. They can, if they know the name of your game, like if it's your friend, they can go to it, they can find it, everything's fine. But Steam doesn't actually show your game to other people until it gets 10 reviews. So definitely, talk to friends, talk to family members, get them to write those reviews, because those first 10 reviews are extremely important. In my research, I found, if I'm not mistaken, reviews for keys that are given out for free, I don't think count. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure that's true. So this has to be people that actually buy the game. And also, it's tough to recover from a bad launch. Again, this goes into Steam algorithms being a little complex and arcane, but from what I understand, if a game doesn't do well, Steam sort of learns that, and it's a lot harder than to make progress later. It is possible, but it's definitely going to take a lot of effort on your part, a lot of updates, a lot of bug fixes, a lot of people actually showing interest. Lesson 5 is that launching is not the finish line. So I expected, hey, I'm going to launch the game, and then I'm going to actually be able to take a break after this big, long push that I did, and that's not true. So after you launch the game, you're going to be doing things like bug fixes. There was a quote that, or a thing that a friend in QA once told me that was, you can spend, even in AAA space, when you spend multiple years making this game, and you've had like 30 or 40 QA testers, or maybe even more, working on the game, on the first day of your game being released, there will be more hours put into that game than you've done in that multiple years with all the QA testers that you had, just because, if you have like 1 million people playing it, that's a whole lot of hours. So they will find bugs that you never even thought of. They'll be also testing on so many different machines than you've been testing, even if you've been trying to actually test on multiple different machines. You're also going to be doing game updates. In theory, you have some sort of plan or roadmap for how to keep this game going, how to update it, different things that you want added to the game. You'll get lots of player feedback. So whether that's through reviews or people contacting you, or maybe you have a Discord where people can send you feedback, all these different places, people will be sending you things and you'll be like, oh, that sounds great. I want to add that to the game. That's going to take time and effort to add that. Also, marketing is a full-time job. It takes a lot of work to actually market a game, whether that's social media posts or even just like creating ads. That's going to take your time and effort. Short-form content is absolutely the most watched and interacted with things in my experience and for things that I've seen with other people. So places like TikTok, YouTube Shorts, and Instagram Reels. I'm pretty sure that my lowest views short content got more views than my highest view long content. So it's really important to be on these different platforms if you want to market your own game. So going back to Grapplers Relic Rivals, these are some things that I tried to do post-launch to sort of improve the game after I had launched. I created new levels, new traps, different relics, because these were some things that players had said that they wanted. I think that after between now and launch, I think I like doubled the number of levels that I had in the game. I added achievements. Now this is definitely something that I should have added before launch, but I had never done this before. I didn't have time, it just sort of fell off. And again, I was working on a very rapid timeline, but I added those achievements up there. I added what I call game changer options. So these are options that change the game. These are things like exploding corpses, having players start with relics so that it just sort of accelerated the gameplay. They could change movement speed either up or down. They could adjust gravity either up or down, and various options like that. I added a single player mode because that was one of the most requested changes to the game. People like, I went into this thinking, oh, I'll make a multiplayer game and everyone will love it and it'll be great. And people immediately went, I want to play this by myself. Like, I don't have friends to constantly bring over. So I just want something that I can play here. So I added that. I added some different speedrun challenge modes that they could play. I added a demo, which once again, that's something you should definitely have before you launch your game. That's an important marketing beat that you should have. And that also allows streamers to then pick it up and say, is this a game that I even want to stream for players? I've heard that a lot of streamers are they're not interested in playing a game until they know that it's something that the people that they stream for will like. So having a demo is very important. And then I also added various bug fixes and tuning, again, going back to the fact that, you'll have more players playing your game after launch than during development. You'll have lots of ideas for different things that need to be fixed. And then Grapplers Relic Rivals, as I kind of mentioned before, was streamed by Stumped, which is a group of people that get together and play local multiplayer games. So again, they were one that I did some research and I was like, oh, lots of local multiplayer games are streamed by them. So they are definitely a great fit for me to reach out to. I reached out to them. They didn't message me, but then after, 2 weeks or a month or something like that, I messaged them again and they're like, oh shoot, we forgot to respond. Yeah, sure, we'll totally stream your game. So that was really awesome to see them play the game and get some feedback there. I did a Reddit AMA, which was basically I was like, hey, I'm a AAA game dev. I'm releasing my first indie game. Ask me anything. And got 18,000 views, which for me, that was like insane. I was like, holy cow, people are actually engaging with this. This is great. I'm able to like help people with indie dev and such, which was wonderful. I showed the game at Seattle Indies Expo. Thanks, everybody. We had basically a full booth the whole entire time. It was wonderful seeing people constantly playing the game. We had just released the single player mode there. So we had one booth or one screen that was constantly playing local multiplayer matches, and then another one where they were actually able to do those challenge modes, and I got to get feedback from them. And honestly, I probably made it a little bit too difficult because people had a tough time with that. But then I went to go back and I got to go back and make those updates and update those levels so they were a little easier. And then I had some articles written by like Hard Drive and indiegames.eu, which was pretty cool to see people actually like writing professional reviews for my indie game. And so all of this I wanted to mention to kind of get to sales and talk about that. So even with all of that, Grapplers Relic Rivals was not a financial success. It was a super quick game that also, again, I didn't do the marketing research to find a game that people actually wanted to play to start off. Local multiplayer games, I think, are mostly a dead genre, with online multiplayer now, and we're post-pandemic, so people don't necessarily want to get together to play with people to play games so much. There was a weekend after launch where I did a Steam update round, which if you don't know is a way to like get increased visibility on Steam for about a month. I did a major update, which is the single player mode. I showed the game at Seattle Indies Expo, and I did a 20% sale, and there was just nothing. It just seemed, again, kind of like that. It's hard to recover from a bad launch thing that Steam just didn't want to, or the Steam algorithm didn't want to actually push the game to people. But again, my goal for this game was not to sell millions of copies of this game. My goal was to learn things along the way. And so if you ask me, was Grapplers Relic Rivals a success? I think so, because I learned tons of stuff along the way, and I did it in a much shorter time period than I might have otherwise. And I also did it on a much smaller game so that when I failed, it wasn't as bad. And I'm a big believer that a shipped game is infinitely better than a canceled one. So I actually was able to release this game and learn things along the way, and that was great. I've kind of been talking about this as I've been going, but I want to go into some of the challenges or maybe reasons why Grapplers Relic Rivals didn't do as well as it should have or could have. So it was an 8-month dev cycle. That means that from the start of when I started doing any code to somebody actually till when the game released, there's only 8 months for somebody to actually discover this game, and that's not a lot of time, right? It was local multiplayer only, which, as I've mentioned, players just don't seem to want as much as, say, a single-player game or a more story-driven game or an online multiplayer game. This was a challenge along the way, but the resolution change that I had mentioned, not having a target resolution in mind, meant that I spent a lot of time just fixing like every single number in my game and updating it to the correct resolution. There was a very difficult audio bug that I had that took, again, like maybe 2 weeks or so, which when you're only working on an 8-month timeline is pretty significant. Long story short, it ended up being some sort of like engine value in GameMaker that just quite didn't work, and it constantly basically would, or randomly would spike the audio level. I ended up actually tracking that down because I sent a message to the GameMaker Discord, and one of the GameMaker devs actually was able to download my project. Like, I sent him my project, he downloaded it, got an old version of GameMaker because that's what I was working on, and debugged it using like actual GameMaker tools, which is pretty cool to work with him to do that. My artist and sound designer were amazing, but again, working on a like 6 to 8 month deadline for the whole project meant that my artist and sound designer only had like 2 months or so to do their work, and that's not a lot of time, right? So this was a very accelerated loop, a very accelerated timeline, and it meant that I didn't have time to do the iteration loops that you would have wanted on a normal project. Marketing is not something that I'm good at. It's definitely something that I'm learning. And again, things like short form content is definitely the way to go nowadays. But I didn't do enough of that as I was developing the game. And again, when it's only a 6 to 8 month timeline, that's not a lot of time for somebody to discover your game. And once again, it's very hard to recover from a failed launch. So that goes back into one of the lessons, which was make sure that you make as big of a launch as you can. And also one of the things that I didn't mention there was, if possible, release on multiple platforms at the same time, because that'll help elevate your launch. So I'm going to go through just a few quick lessons that I learned in AAA that might be able to help you when making your indie game. Prototype. So similar to the lesson of, or the starting on a short project, it's important to do rapid prototyping for various systems and mechanics and whatever you're doing. You can, if you need to, you can then also playtest those prototypes with people, which is very helpful to get feedback, which is going to be another one of these lessons, but that'll help you sort of iterate in a very, very quick loop that will then help make the end product a lot better. Brainstorm. Anytime I was stuck on an idea, brainstorming helped me a ton. So I always just, when I brainstorm, I just spit out as many ideas as I can. I write them all down, or I type them up or whatever, and don't turn down any ideas at this stage. So definitely just write down everything that comes to your mind. And then after you've done that and kind of exhausted all your options, go back through them and sort of prioritize which ones might not be feasible or which ones might be better ideas than other ideas. And this is just a way that a thing that I use to kind of unstick myself sometimes when I'm chewing on a problem that I can't quite figure out. Iterate, iterate, iterate. I'm sure you've heard it a million times, but any artistic endeavor or making games or whatever will benefit from more iteration loops, because you try something out, you get some feedback, you learn something, you then iterate and make it better. And the more times that you can do this for any game or system or art piece, the better it'll be. Prioritization, this is definitely a skill that I feel you have to kind of build up. But one tool that I use while prioritizing what to work on for my game is to ask myself, if the game were to fail to ship today, what would be the reason? And then what can I do to sort of prevent that or stop that? So at the beginning of your game, it'll be very simple things. It'll be like, my game doesn't have input, or my game doesn't have a character, or my game doesn't have a camera. But as you start going along with the project, you'll get into some deeper things like, I don't have a medium-sized game loop, or this sort of system isn't really fun and engaging, and I should try to do some things to elevate that. And so you'll start getting into, oh, okay, that's actually the problem that people are having with my game, and then you can work on things to make that better. Get playtest very often and very early, like probably way earlier than you think, and get feedback from people, because you kind of have to work with them to actually dig into their feedback a lot of times, because some people will just be like, oh, it's a fun, whatever, okay. But you have to like really get into like, no, what would you change? What did you find engaging so that I can keep that or work on that some more? And so you definitely have to like dig into that a little bit more. But players will actually, I found, open up to you and say like, here's actually what I think would be good for your game. And they come up with some very good, clever ideas. So definitely listen to people and dig into their feedback. There's also a story, let me go into here. And then also, when people give you feedback, don't take it personally. Use it as a way to improve your craft or your game or your art or whatever they're giving feedback on. It's something that you really have to learn, but to develop that thick skin and really use their feedback as a way to improve rather than taking it personally. Similar to the whole feedback thing, there's a story of a friend who worked at, I think it was 343 on a Halo game, and there was a designer that got some feedback that like a rocket launcher just wasn't feeling powerful. They had done some play testing, and people were saying, yeah, we don't want to use this. It's not powerful enough. And he kind of dug into the numbers. He looked into it, and he's like, well, it's mathematically, it is balanced. It's fine. And so he started digging into that feedback and thinking about like, oh, what can I do to make it better? And it turns out he was able to just give it a better sound effect. And then players actually started using it and liking it and thinking that it felt good. So when somebody gives you feedback, again, really dig into like what you can do to improve that and what their feedback is actually about, not necessarily just taking it at face value. Communication is extremely important in any sort of team-based environment. So especially games where you're working with artists or sound designers or programmers or designers, whatever it is, definitely work on communication. It is extremely important, especially cross-disciplinary communication. This is something you definitely have to build up, but you can sort of speak somebody else's language. That'll help a lot to kind of see where they're coming from, see what sort of challenges they have to face, and then be able to talk to them about the game or the piece of thing that you're working on. And then this is sort of my hack for creativity. If you're getting stuck on something and you're trying to be creative, just smush two things together. A plus B equals C. Taking two things and then just smushing them together, everyone, like, when you do that, people will see that as like, oh, wow, you've created this cool new thing, but all you've done is just taken two things. And so again, when I get stuck on creativity, that's definitely where I go to. So yeah, that's my talk on the things I learned while working on Grapplers Relic Rivals. There's my email and my link tree, which has all my different like social information if you'd like that. Feel free to message me anytime or email me anytime. I'm always down to talk about games and game design. And if you're stuck on something, just message me and I'll help out. Now we can go into, if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask and I'll try to answer as best I can.
I was wondering, what made you decide to do Game Maker?
Yeah, good question. So I had used GameMaker before for some very quick, rapid prototyping things. And GameMaker is the engine that, for me, just like gets out of your way and allows you to make your stuff. I had used like Unity and Unreal, and I looked into them, and I've even looked into them for my second project. But they're just, to me, they're very clunky. They do everything when you don't necessarily need everything. And GameMaker was just super streamlined to me. GameMaker does only do 2D games, so that is kind of a limitation. If you're going to work in 3D, you can't use GameMaker. But yeah, it was just very simple to use, simple to learn. There's a lot of good, like, they have a GameMaker community and a GameMaker Discord if you get stuck, and lots of tutorials out there for it. So it just worked for me.
You said that you got a pretty good team. How did you find the people you worked with?
Oh yeah, so my sound designer was actually from Seattle Indies. He reached out to me after I had kind of said that I put out a video of like, hey, I'm looking for a sound designer, and so yeah, I talked to him and we just kind of hit it off. And so I was like, okay, cool, yeah, I'll work with him for sound design. For an artist though. I had pinged a whole bunch of places like the GameMaker community forum, Reddit at a few places. I think I like posted something on my website looking for an artist. And that actually was a bit of a big process. So actually, I think I got something like 50 or 100 applicants, kind of narrowed it down based on just sending a few emails and asking a few questions to about like 10 people or so. And then I did interviews, just like 30-minute to 1-hour interviews, mostly just getting vibes and kind of asking them some more technical art questions, and landed on one person that I just really, really liked. He had really great skills. He knew a lot of the technical aspects, so especially when I was talking about like the target resolution and stuff, he was able to like immediately help me with that question. And I just knew that he would be good to work with, and I was right. He was amazing. Huh?
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. I'm wondering about when you reach out to streamers. I know a lot of them, at least some of the bigger ones, will have fees and they want compensation for playing your game. How do you handle that? Do you just stick to smaller streamers? How do you handle that side of it?
Yeah, so I think that would obviously very much depend on your project's budget. If for a simple game like this, on my super quick timeline and super small budget, yeah, there's no way that I would be like, yeah, I'm going to pay a streamer to do this. But for my next game, that's definitely something that I'm going to look into. And it's really, I haven't done any paid streamer work, so I don't know exactly how that works. I'll have to look into that. But I'd suggest if you're working on a smaller game, yeah, stick to streamers that will just kind of cover anything, or that say that they like indie games. But if that fits your project's budget, then that's a thing that you can do. I would definitely, do some research and look into like what you get basically for that cost. Because again, I'm not sure how that works or what sort of return you'll make on that.
Along those same lines, we had a question on Twitch. Did you reach out to Hard Drive and the other website that covered your game? And if not, how did they become aware of your game to review it?
Hard Drive, I actually don't remember. I think that I reached out to them. It's possible that they just sent me an email. I probably reached out to them, but I'm not 100% sure. And then, I'm sorry, I'm mixing these up. That was indiegames.eu. I think they just either reached out to me or I reached out to them. I'm not sure. But the Hard Drive one was actually through Seattle Indies Discord. I knew that I was going to be going to Seattle Indies Expo, and I saw him post on the Seattle Indies Discord of like, hey, I'm looking to cover some games that are going to be at 6. If anybody's interested, ping me. And so I pinged him, and he was like, yeah, sure. He talked to because again, my game's a local multiplayer game, so he had to set something up, which took a little bit, but then he was able to play the game with some of them, and he wrote up an article for that.
How specifically did you do your market research? Like, what led you to the conclusions that specific genres would do better than others?
A lot of Googling, found the how to market a game sort of thing. He goes into, again, a lot of the like data of Steam sales and Steam DB. So he really digs into the data, and then he'll list like different, like here are the genres that are like have various number of sales. He also like filters out ones with like no reviews or very low reviews. And then I think he also does a separate one that's like, these are games that have gotten at least 1,000 reviews. So again, he really breaks it down into some very good data-driven ideas. But a lot of it, like even separate from that, just doing a lot of Googling, a lot of research, and looking into what people have said.
So you mentioned one of your goals was no sales, and then you talked a lot about marketing. Like, what made you want to do marketing? Cool.
Because at that point I had spent like, 6 to 8 months making this game. And so I might as well have, spent some time trying to market the game. So even though I had a goal of, I don't care about sales expectations, that doesn't mean that I wouldn't, if a million people were like, I'm going to pay you to make this game, I wouldn't say no. I'd be like, oh, cool, thanks. Like, thanks for giving me money for my next game, right? So I wanted to try. And then also, because I know that my next game, I want to make money, I had to do some amount of that to learn the process again. That was the goal for this one, is learn, well, kind of everything, but how to market a game, how to contact streamers, how to work with the press, that sort of thing. So I definitely had to at least give that some amount of try on this game.
How'd you work out the legal details between your sound designer and your artist? Like, did you just have a just like informal Discord agreement, or did you write a contract that explained like, this is what we'll do with our money?
Yeah. So again, especially because this game was so small and such a small timeline and such a small budget, I wasn't too worried about legal concerns and that sort of thing. So I did just go online and find like a sort of boilerplate contract that I edited a little, and went over that with them on a call, which I felt was very important, of like, here are the things that I think this legal or that I've written this legal document to mean, and made sure that we were on the same page. Because once again, communication is extremely important. But also at the end of the day, I knew like, even if something really bad happened, I wasn't going to do anything about it for such a small game. And I knew that it wasn't going to matter. I would highly suggest, if you're actually working on like a big game that you want to sell well, that sort of thing, that you talk to a lawyer, that you get them to write up the contract. Because yeah, what I did probably would not hold water in a court, that sort of thing. So definitely look into that if you are making a much bigger indie game.
Thanks for sharing the variable your experience. I have two questions. My first question is, I'm wondering if there was a strategic factor for your game's price. What was your thought like behind the price? That's my first question. And secondly, you mentioned your game had bad release. Maybe I missed, but I wonder what was the reason, and if you improve it, and what would you do that?
Sorry, can you repeat the second question? I didn't quite catch that.
So you had a bad release. Your game has a bad release. I was wondering what was the main reason, and what would you do that if you could fix it?
Yeah, gotcha. So for the price of my game, I looked into other similar games and how much they were priced, and then I think I probably did a little tweaking of like, maybe a different game was $20, but they were a lot bigger than me. Okay, I can't charge $20 for my game. Kind of figured that out. And this is not like my area of expertise, but I definitely knew that, a lot of people buy Steam games on sale. So I pushed the price maybe a little higher than I possibly should have, because I was like, okay, well, it's going to be discounted 20% or 30% or something. and kind of adjusted for that. And then, I mean, most of this whole talk was about the release and things that I learned to kind of change that. But the gist was, you know, the genre is not something that I think is super appealing to people nowadays because it's a 2D platformer, it's PvP, it's local multiplayer. I didn't add the single player until afterwards. It's also a much smaller game than I think a lot of people are willing to play in that same space because there's like Smash Bros with like, hey, we've got 200 levels or whatever. And I think also, I think it's Rivals of Ether or something like that. There's like a free-to-play one that's like, somebody had mentioned on like Reddit or something like, why would somebody play your game when they have to pay when there's like this game for free? And yeah, I'm not sure how that exactly ties into things, or like how you can beat free, right? So I would do that differently. Again, contacting streamers a lot earlier than I did. I think that really hurt me. And yeah, again, just basically a lot of the points that I went over in the presentation.
One more question.
I already have. Yeah, so aside from prototyping and iterating, what helped you figure out how to decide on the nitty-gritty details of the core gameplay mechanics, like say move speed, grapple speed, how fast you move when grappled, like frequency of all the relic drops, etc.
Right, yeah, good question. I don't know if the mic quite picked it up, so I'll just repeat it, which is like, how did I find all the fine details of the game of like move speed and grapple speed and chest spawn rate and that sort of thing? Honestly, it was a lot of playtesting and iteration, but at the same time, I have a background in AAA game design and technical design. And so even separate from this game, I've listened to players' feedback on lots of things, watched various playtests at a AAA level, kind of gotten a lot of that information is just sort of second nature to me. So, but my process was basically start with something that I think feels good, play test it, watch people play it and see, like, you know, if I watch a match and they finish the match and only one relic spawns, clearly I need to make that happen more often. So a lot of it is just game feel, basically, and my previous experience through doing this. And really, you know, for somebody that doesn't have that, it's just do that playtesting and iteration and do it constantly, and you'll eventually sort of build up the knowledge of kind of how to do that as you go along.
All right. Well, thanks everybody. Thanks, Paul. Let's give Paul a round of applause. He'll be around for a little bit. We're going to take a quick, like, 30-minute break. You can get up, stretch your legs, go use the bathroom, which is outside the door through the hall on your left. And then we'll come back with our next talk. If you're watching on the stream, we're going to pause for a little bit, and we'll be back in about 30 minutes.
Thank you. Should I take all my stuff down? I assume, yeah.
part of the evening. So please take a seat. Is that the official way of doing it? I'll probably just give you a dedicated microphone.
Does it work? Does it work? Does it work? I think it does.
Take it away.
All right. Gavin, first, thank you so much for finding the time to come down and have a chat with us. It is so awesome to have you here.
Not a problem. I'm happy to be here. Thank you all for having me. I really appreciate it.
So for anybody who doesn't know, I thought maybe we could do like just a very brief overview of like who you are, what you've done, past projects, all the way from like My Beautiful Paper Smile and what most people probably know you for, Choo Choo Charles, and getting announced at the Game Award for your new game Cuff Bust. Like, it's quite a ride. It's quite an escalation path that you're on. It's really amazing to see a solo dev coming so far so fast. So like, if you want to just give us a brief overview of like how that got started.
Thank you. Yeah, for sure. So first off, I would be kind of curious. How many people are familiar with like Choo Choo Charles or any of that stuff at all? A couple folks here and there. Okay, cool. Yeah. So a little bit of background. I'm Gavin. I started game development when I was 12, and I'm 23 now, so I've been making games for a little over a decade. Started out on the Blender game engine, was messing around with that for a little while, got into Unreal shortly after that. Started making some small mobile games, published a couple small things here and there. Later on in high school, I made a game called My Beautiful Paper Smile that I spent about 3.5 years on, released that to a moderate reception. It did okay. But I wanted to try and make something that could get more visibility and turn game development into more of like a full-time job for me. And so at that point, I made Choo Choo Charles, which came out a couple years back now, I think about 2 years ago now. Went pretty viral across social media and did pretty well. That kind of got me into my current project, Cuff Bust, which is a multiplayer prison escape game that I announced at the Summer Game Fest this past June, I think. And so now I'm just working on that, getting that prepped for release. And that's kind of where things are at.
Yeah, I guess. One thing I thought was interesting is like, could you explain like maybe the thought process of like coming up with the idea for Choo Choo Charles?
Or yeah. So at the time, so I was coming off of the release of My Beautiful Paper Smile. That game, for a little bit of context, is sort of a 2.5D point and click walking simulator sort of game. It got a little bit of attention on YouTube, but I was seeing that the attention, it wasn't snowballing like I thought it could. I was trying to make something that could go viral. I was trying to play off of themes that I was seeing in games like Bendy and the Ink Machine and Five Nights at Freddy's and stuff like that. But for My Beautiful Paper Smile, it just wasn't working. The conversion rates weren't very good. The virality wasn't really there. And so for my next game, I decided that it seemed like a lot of the things that were leading a lot of these other games to become successful was characters, strong characters, and specifically nostalgic characters and unique environments, things like that. like you see in Five Nights at Freddy's, Bendy and the Ink Machine, Tattletale, a lot of other these similar sort of viral horror games. And so I started trying to think of characters that would be kind of nostalgic and familiar to people that I could base an entire game around. And so using that idea of a nostalgic character as kind of the core of a game, I started thinking about kids' TV shows. I was like, well, that's kind of nostalgic, right? There's plenty of kids' TV shows out there, and most people would have watched them as kids. Therefore, it's kind of nostalgic. And so for me growing up, one of my favorites was Thomas the Tank Engine. I was like, hey, trains are cool. Why not do something with trains? So that was kind of the initial spark for that. And then coming out of that, I kind of started crafting some more train-based gameplay mechanics, like the open world traversal and things like that, that I thought would be just more interesting from a gameplay perspective.
Can you tell me your thoughts on like announcing a game? So like, is the initial announce really important, or like, I've talked to people who work in YouTube and they say like, if a YouTube video doesn't do well, you can post it again, like redo it and post it again. And like, is the same true of a game announcement, or is that a little more like something you can only do once?
I think it's technically something that you could, it is possible that you could announce a game and it not do well the first time, and then maybe later on when you release the game, it does really well. That's not usually how it goes. Typically, your initial announcement is going to be very, very telling of the overall success of the game. But there are a lot of games, you know, probably the most known example would be something like Among Us, where it's like, you know, they put out trailers for it. They had announced it. People knew about it. And it didn't do well. And it wasn't until it got into the hands of streamers that it was really able to be shown off in the most enticing light. There are some games that just, they're very difficult to describe in the context of a trailer or short form content or devlogs, things like that. But once they're in the hands of players, they can start spreading through word of mouth, good reviews, social proof, and things like that. So it's a telling sign if your announcement isn't going well, but it doesn't necessarily doom you. It's kind of, yeah, it depends on the game.
So just a follow-up question on the topic of, can you do it again? Did you want to do it again? Because you had a bit of a different strategy. Getting discovered by Jeff Keighley and invited to one of the biggest events in the world in games. Like, if that hadn't happened, and also I'm really curious, how did the cat get out of the bag? Like, who among your friends knew about the project, and how did that make its way to the top where you were discovered? And if that hadn't happened, would you have wanted to announce your new game the same way as Charles?
So I guess I might need clarification on the question because I'm kind of stupid like that. But okay, so as in, would I announce Cuff Bust the same way that I announced Choo Choo Charles?
Yeah.
If not for Summer Game Fest.
Correct.
Yeah. So if not for Summer Game Fest, I definitely would have done pretty much the same thing that I did. And it wouldn't have gone as well. It wouldn't have gone as well as it did with Choo Choo Charles. Choo Choo Charles is a game that it's very instantly captivating. It's, you know, the character, and you know, you can watch a 5-second clip and it'll just be really like kind of in your face engaging. So it's an immediately viral kind of concept. With Cuff Bust, it's one that I don't think, it doesn't explain itself as well, so it's more difficult for it to go viral. The characters, they're interesting, they're recognizable, they're decently well branded, but they're not necessarily viral on their own. When paired with, you know, a personality from, you know, a live stream or a YouTube video, I think it'll have more potential, but it's kind of one of those sort of things. Oh yeah, there they are. Yeah, so with Summer Game Fest, I still don't exactly know how Jeff found out about it. I've been posting some teasers on like Twitter. I don't know if he saw that. I don't know if some folks from his team saw that, but at some point he saw something, I guess, and reached out. He's like, "Hey, I heard you're working on a new game. Can I see it?" And I was like, "Oh, sure, why not?" So showed it off to him, and he was like, "Yeah, that's cool. We should announce it." So that ended up just being a natural, like,
So it wasn't
Why
a
wouldn't
complete secret.
Not a complete secret. It was public
There's
that I
some
was working
breadcrumbs.
on something, but yeah, that was about it.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna ask. Is just like, could you put out a trailer without doing any sort of like pre-marketing for it, or do you have to put it out like after you've already kind of like made videos about the game somehow?
I mean, you can kind of do it. However, I think the main thing is just that. I mean, I guess it also depends on what the strategy is. For my strategy, my goal is to go viral. My goal is to take advantage of the algorithms and let those push my content as much as possible. You know, the main reason that I waited, because I waited about a year, I was in development for about a year on Cuff Bust before I announced it. And that was mostly just out of necessity because I didn't exactly know what I wanted the game to be in every aspect. I didn't know exactly what the visuals should be like. I didn't know exactly what the tone of it should be. I had a general idea, but it wasn't all there. So I kind of had to just wait a while until I kind of had a good feel for it. And that all just kind of happened to line up well with the Summer Game Fest and when I started working on the trailer and all of that.
Speaking of tone and specifically art style, they both have a very distinct style, but they're really different. Like almost as different as the difference in how these two games were announced and like brought to the world. One was like primarily just word of mouth, getting it out there, getting that viral spike on social media. And the other one was on a global stage. So two different marketing environments and also two different art styles. Did you have anybody not know it was your game? Like, was there any confusion because they look so different?
I don't know. I don't know exactly. I mean, I think if my name wasn't attached to Cuff Bust, people probably wouldn't recognize it as being one of my games because there really aren't that many similarities, if any. Yeah, I don't know. I'm sure there are some people who have been confused.
You don't think that's a problem though? I mean, like,
no, it is. Well, sort of. So from an audience conversion standpoint, it's definitely a problem. You know, I've got my YouTube channel and I've got all these subscribers that have been following me for Choo Choo Charles. A lot of them aren't interested in Cuff Bust. And it's like from a YouTube perspective and from an audience conversion standpoint, it's not great. You know, my goal in this was not necessarily to try and keep the YouTube channel going. It was more so trying to make a game that I thought would have better chances on launch for longevity and things like that. Choo Choo Charles, just in the way that it's formatted, it's more linear, less replayable. The horror genre also just has a naturally smaller appeal than something hyper colorful like this. And so my main decision point here was just like, okay, I'm going to try and make something that can reach a broader audience. And unfortunately, that meant having to make a pretty sharp turn in just my overall company branding and everything. But hopefully, it's a better long-term decision.
Was that a consideration when you were transitioning to working on Charles from your other games? Because you've worked in like almost I guess you could describe it as like a Myst style game, and you've also done a game that's primarily hand drawn. So you're kind of working your way through a bunch of different styles. Was that a concern when you were going to Choo Choo Charles, or is that more of a more recent thing now that you have such an audience? It might be a consideration to try to keep that audience.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't as much of an issue when I was kind of swapping styles to start working on Choo Choo Charles, because again, I didn't really have an audience. I didn't, you know, there were a handful of people, but not enough to push a game as far as I was trying to push it. So yeah, it wasn't something that I was thinking about too much then.
This is a little bit of a pivot. I was just thinking, you do really interesting devlog. They're almost like a little bit like Mr. Beast style devlogs. They have like a touch of it, you know. And I was wondering, like, do you have thoughts on? I feel like the problem with devlogs a lot of the time is they attract other game developers, but they don't attract like other people than that. And do you have thoughts on like how to make a devlog that is interesting for like non-game developers, basically.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, it's definitely a big misconception. Most people in the industry will tell you that devlogs are bad marketing because they only appeal to developers, which is only devlogs that only appeal to developers. If you're talking about syntax and you're talking about how you optimized for an extra 10% frame rate or whatever technical stuff it is that we might be into and that we might be proud of, your average 12-year-old probably doesn't care about the coding language that you're using and the specific nuance of like why it's better optimized for this type of game. You know, with my stuff, I try and focus much more on, I try and hone in on very specific topics. You know, so like if I'm adding, you know, like for Choo Choo Charles, when I was adding new guns to the game, I was like, okay, that will make a good devlog. It's flashy, it's interesting, it's the kind of thing that your average gamer is gonna be like, okay, cool, yeah, guns. Whoa, look, there's a rocket launcher. That's so talking about specific topics that are flashier, that are more interesting, more visual, stuff like that tends to be a lot more engaging, as well as any topic that you can implement some sort of a story structure into. If there were certain bugs and challenges that you had during development that you can turn into more of a story to make it more engaging, then that kind of stuff definitely broadens the appeal past, you know, just your general game developer base.
Is there like a structure you use for videos? I guess like repeated, like do you outline them and like make sure you hit like, oh, I need like 5 conflicts, I guess, to work through or something? Like, does that exist, or do you just kind of like feel it out, I guess, in the edit?
Yes, yeah, so that definitely exists. So I've got a template that I use, and the basic rundown is so I'll give a quick rundown of how the YouTube algorithm works. Basically, the videos that YouTube promotes are videos that are going to keep people on the platform for as long as possible. So that means content that has high click-through rates, right? So when people see a thumbnail, what percentage of them are going to click on it and start watching? And then what is the average view duration and the view length, right? So YouTube wants everybody to click on your video and watch a long video for a long period of time. That keeps people on the platform, it keeps advertisers making money, or it keeps YouTube making money from advertisers, and that's when they're going to push your content. So in order to up that retention, the biggest thing that you need is conflict and resolution of a conflict and progress, clear visual progress towards the resolution of that conflict. So I start out my videos, within the first 5 seconds, I'm outlining the full general look at like, okay, what am I doing in this video? Okay, today I'm adding, I don't know, 5 weapons to my game or whatever it might be. And then in the next like 15 seconds, I'm gonna try and give people a little bit of extra context, just enough context to know what it is that I'm talking about and kind of know like, okay, you know, for the past year, I've been working on such and such game, and I need to do this because there are currently no weapons, so there's no way to defeat the enemies, and that's a problem because in a game, you need to be able to defeat the enemies. And then immediately, I start working towards progress towards completing that goal. So that's going to be making new art for the guns. It's going to be adding some particle effects. And then usually around the 1 minute mark, I'm going to try and throw in some kind of a twist or additional conflict that's going to.
I agree.
Some kind of is it louder now?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not being too loud, am I?
All good.
Perfect. All right, perfect. So some kind of additional conflict that's going to change how people are interpreting the progress, I guess. And then from that point, from that 1 minute point, essentially everything that I'm doing is I'm just making more progress. I'm reminding people of the overall goal. I am talking about other problems and bugs. You know, one of the mistakes that people oftentimes will make is they'll just give a laundry list of like, I added this and I added this and I added this and I added this, but without conflict, it's not as interesting. Unless the stuff you're adding is just so insane and out of this world, it's probably not going to keep people engaged. So yeah, conflict is one of the easiest ways to increase engagement and then just showing people that progress. That's the format.
Thank you. That was very helpful. I guess like I'm sure figuring out all the YouTube stuff took up a lot of time to learn. And why did you decide to make like your own videos for the game and make sure those were like very high quality as opposed to like focusing more on like, I guess like, why did you think making a successful YouTube channel was like a worthwhile investment in the first place?
Yeah, so it's an interesting thing. So the reason I originally started doing YouTube is because I was trying to find any way to market my games, right? Because I started doing YouTube back my Beautiful Paper Smile days. I started out just making Unreal Engine tutorials. Turns out people don't want to buy your game if you're just making Unreal Engine tutorials. So I started trying to do like other like game development related content, and it wasn't really growing or anything. But the goal was I needed just some way to market my games because I couldn't find anything else that was really working well. So throughout the development of Choo Choo Charles, the main opportunity that I saw, because when it initially went viral, I put out the trailer, it went viral, it got over 100,000 wish lists within the first month or so. So it's like I had a decent fan base for the game already, but I didn't have funding. So that was a big issue for me. I didn't have funding and I really didn't want to get a publisher involved. So when I saw all the virality that it was getting, I saw that as an opportunity to try and restart my YouTube channel, do more devlogs, hopefully keep a little bit of hype and kind of keep people up to date and try and keep the existing fan base that I had just randomly grown all of a sudden, try and keep them engaged, but also as a way to hopefully get the game funded through ad revenue and sponsorships and things like that, which ended up working out pretty well. So that was the main thing. Yeah.
Going to be a really hard pivot to business talk, but could you talk a bit about dealing with publishers? And like, I mean, you were approached by publishers probably immediately after Cuffbust. And as soon as Choo Choo Charles started to go viral, like, were you approached by just tons of publishers wanting a little piece of that?
Yes. Yeah. So I heard from a lot more publishers for Choo Choo Charles than I have for Cuffbust. For Cuffbust, I've heard more from investors, which has been interesting. But yeah, so for Choo Choo Charles, lots of publishers, lots of the big names that you've probably heard of. But it's one of these things where, you know, by the time that any of them were reaching out, the game already had well over 100,000 wish lists. I'm sitting here like, I know that this game is going to make money when it releases. All that I need to do is get it past the finish line. Why would I give 50% of my revenue if, you know, because I didn't even need that much funding. You know, like let's say I get $50,000 in funding and then I know that I'm going to be paying perhaps hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars in royalties to a publisher. It just didn't make sense. So it was something that I just wanted to avoid as much as possible in any way that I could.
In addition to like the financial incentives of not having to answer to publishers, do you think it also had something to do with like just the brand of Two Star Games and like just being a solo dev? And there's been a lot of controversy over the last couple of years about like what is indie, who's considered indie, physically with the Game Awards. But was that part of the consideration? It was like, well, if I have a publisher and I'm funded, like, am I still indie? And is that part of the story important to the brand that you're building with your projects?
Definitely wasn't a consideration. No.
No further questions.
Pretty much.
But on the same topic of like doing it yourself, since that wasn't a consideration, had you ever considered outsourcing like the social media aspects just to give you more time on development? If that would have been possible at the time, would you have gotten like content writer or editor or somebody to like just take a bit of the load off of personality? I know a couple people that have dedicated social media and marketing days, like every Friday from noon till midnight is just pre-writing tweets, recording screenshots and all the things that they're going to share out for the rest of the week, just to take that kind of mindset out of the normal day-to-day dev cycle and just drive hard on the social aspect of it so they don't have to worry about it and they can just focus in and crunch. Has that ever appealed to you to sort of offload some of that?
Yeah, so like I have an editor now for the YouTube channel, but at the time, and I mean even now, but for Choo Choo Charles, I spent very little time on the YouTube channel. I think throughout I think it was about 14, 15 months of development, maybe 1 month worth of time went to marketing activities. So making and editing devlogs, doing social media posts and stuff like that. So it was relatively little time. I would make a devlog in maybe 3 or 4 days. So it was pretty quick. And I would only put out a devlog maybe once every month or two. And then at a certain point, once, the game had hundreds of thousands of wish lists and I was getting kind of close to finishing the game, I had enough funding to finish it and get it, translated and get voice acting and things like that. Once I kind of got to that point, I pretty much backed off of the marketing stuff entirely. And I went almost silent, except for a handful of Twitter posts here and there for probably 5 or 6 months until the final kind of release push. So it's like if the game happens to be viral enough, then the marketing stuff, it gets pretty simple. It's not something that you necessarily have to spend a lot of time on.
Is it a similar case for that sort of approach you might take when looking at things like porting, like actual development sides or like localization? You see that is as like being similar to like the content creation side as in the terms that it's not like core dev, it's sort of like supporting development. Not to say the marketing isn't core dev, it's super essential as we see. But is it something that you would want to set as like a lower priority to give you more time to focus? Like I know that you outsourced the porting development work for Choo Choo Charles. Are you going to do the same thing for Cuff Bust, or do you want to try to internalize that part this time around?
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, when it comes to porting, yeah, definitely was worth outsourcing that for Choo Choo Charles. For Cuff Bust, I'm not going to be porting it. I've got other features that I'm adding, like a level editor, which is the main thing that I'm outsourcing right now. Actually, I'm going to be doing a Steam Workshop integrated level editor. So that I've got a co-development studio working on. But because of that, since it's integrated into Steam, it wouldn't work on consoles. We would need to do a bunch of other random stuff in order to get it working on consoles. And then, also with this game, I want to try and support it for longer after launch, with not quite in a live service way, but more so just content updates after launch. And when dealing with console certification and all that stuff, that's a pain to try and do that for like a weekly or bi-weekly sort of update. So, yeah.
Could you talk about like the process of hiring people and like how much time do you spend like when you bring on the editor, the contract developers? Like, did you have to spend a lot of time like teaching them how you go about doing things, or was it fairly seamless, I guess?
Kind of depends. So for the editor, I've been working with him for a couple months and it's been pretty seamless. After we finish a video, I'll hop on a call with them and we'll discuss, things that I think went really well, things that didn't go as well, things to try on the next video, stuff like that. And so that's been going pretty well. With the Codev studio, we just had our kickoff call this Monday. So we'll see how things go with that and what the time commitment looks like there.
How are we doing on time? Should we maybe get to some Q&A?
If you want, yeah, you can ask them there. Yeah,
Okay.
it's 8:35.
Okay. Let's talk technical. Why Unreal Engine?
I'm pretty bad with the technical stuff here.
Is it because it gives you so much free stuff?
I mean, that's nice. That's a plus for me. Unreal Engine. Well, okay. So when I was like 13 and started using Unreal, I was being stupid. I was like, wow, look at the crazy AAA graphics. I'm gonna make a game with crazy AAA graphics, so I need to use Unreal. I didn't really end up utilizing much of that stuff at 13 or even now. So
Is it UDK back then, or was that?
no, it was Unreal 4.
Okay.
Yeah, it had like, it was somewhat recent. It was right when it became free. That's when I started using it. Also, yeah, because it was free. That was the other big one.
Awesome. So yeah, free engine, free assets. That's a huge head start when you're just deciding to start putting things in a level, making the size of the island, making the scope of the game. Were there any things that Unreal did for you specifically to like help you make a cohesive experience? I know that like all the main assets that you interact with, like the train and obviously Charles, weapons. I noticed a bunch of doors and boxes and stuff that all have this very distinct texture. Was there any like special shader that you would just put on like every asset that came into the game, or was it more just filling out the world organically?
So I guess when it comes to the shaders and stuff, so kind of the process with building out the environment and all of that was I would essentially any asset that was fairly generic, trees, rocks, basic stuff like that, I would just get as an asset because there's not really much point in spending 3 hours making a tree that I could get in 5 minutes. It's basically the same thing. And so then what I would do is I would just take the textures out and I would put them into GIMP. I've got like a little like a digital sketch tablet and I would just kind of sketchify the textures. And it was a stylization tactic that I was trying to do. It didn't end up working as well as I'd hoped because a lot of the assets all still kind of just looked like normal assets. They didn't look as stylized as I wanted them to originally. And then obviously there were a lot of the custom assets like the trains and Charles that were also kind of the same thing.
Like the choice of GIMP, also free software.
Free, it's all free.
I guess I just had a question about like game design for a multiplayer game. What is I'm figuring it out as I'm talking. I guess like where do you start with a multiplayer game? Like did you start with like thinking about like what the map's gonna look like? Did you have game mechanics first? Or like I know like with Choo Choo Charles, you were kind of saying like you kind of came up with the character first, if I'm not. So was Cuff Bus like that with like you thought of like the aliens initially? Or that's a very open-ended question. So take it however.
Yeah. So in starting, come up with the concept for Cuff Bus. So it started out with a lot of market research. So in between finishing Choo Choo Charles and coming up with the idea for Cuff Bus, I had 6 months where I was just doing as much research stuff as I could, trying to figure out how to make a game that was, that could go viral post-launch, that could sustain itself for a while, and that would get as high of conversion rates as possible. So multiplayer was one of the things that I settled on, is that multiplayer gives you a way higher ceiling. It's more difficult to get rolling, but it's a higher ceiling. And then it was kind of just a matter of applying as many different, it's kind of a difficult one to get into because it was a large.
Is the map in Cuff Bus, is it all hand placed, or are you using like PCG nodes? So any sort of procedural generation of the prison and like where the exit points are?
Yeah, so right now it's all hand placed. There's not really anything procedural, but I will be randomizing a lot of stuff. There will be randomized item drops, random. There are going to be like different locations where like there are certain walls that are are weak, that lead to like behind the wall areas that you can get through. Like certain things like that will be randomized just for, you know, replayability's sake.
The
It's-
actual the layout of the prison is the same.
It's mostly the
typically?
same.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that something that you've considered? Like, hey, if I have unlimited numbers of levels, it's almost a roguelike. You can play as many times as you want.
I guess that's kind of where the level ender comes in. So hopefully some other folks will make some
Unlimited
cool stuff.
curated levels. I like it.
Yeah, so is your idea like to have almost just like the long tail is like user generated content basically for the game? Or
I think that the user generated content is kind of more of an in between thing, because as a mostly not exactly a solo developer anymore, right? But as a small team, there's only so much content that I can put out post launch in a timely fashion, right? Ideally, you know, people are used to like, you know, live service stuff where they're getting new content every week. I can't really do new content every week. It might be multiple weeks or months. And so I'm hoping that, you know, the level ender gives people something else to kind of engage with while I'm getting other like major updates out.
You have any go-to inspirations for a good level editor? We've seen a couple games like Meet Your Maker come out in the last couple of years, and they've been fairly successful with like a lot of really cool tools. But then you've also got stuff going all the way back to like Halo Forge or Little Big Planet, that most of the content in those games ends up being user generated. Any standout examples that were possibly a favorite?
Probably the main one, and it's not that the level ender that I'll be making is necessarily using a lot of it, but I think like the Super Mario Maker level ender is probably one of the best out there. I think any editors that feel more like a game than a piece of software. So that's kind of my goal with the Cuff Bust editor, is just that it feels approachable to players, and not like a piece of software. That's kind of the main goal.
I think I'm out of questions. If we wanted to, some from the audience.
Thanks for sharing. I have two questions. So for Choo Choo Charles, which went viral, do you think the game would have been successful? Maybe not as successful if it wouldn't have. And related, do you think we should consider virality when making a game or sticking? Yeah.
I mean, yeah, if it hadn't gone viral, it definitely would not be very successful. That's for a start. Yeah. I definitely think, I don't necessarily know that virality should be the main goal. It's a massive goal for me. I think most developers should be mostly focused on marketability. You know, the market research, making sure that you're adding, you know, ideally, you've got mechanics in your game that are visually appealing, right? There's a lot of games that they're perfectly fun to play. You know, you sit down and you play a game. It's like, okay, yeah, sure, that was cool. You know, you go to PAX and stuff, and it's like, okay, that was cool. But if I saw a screenshot of this, would I want to play it? You know, being able to have gameplay that can be communicated as instantaneously as possible just through a single screenshot or through a 3-second clip. It's like people should be able to derive as much information as possible about what the game really is and what it would feel like to play, with as little as possible. So I don't know that virality is necessarily the best goal, because it's a complicated thing to try and get right. But marketability is definitely something that everybody should be focused on.
How do you approach your game design? And by that, do you use your experience from like 11 years of development, as in like, oh, I think this feature would be fun based off of my development experience? Or do you try to, again, do the market research to say, or to gather things from other games and say, hey, based on the research that I've done, I feel like this might be more fun for a lot of players?
Yeah, when it comes to game design, I am probably not the best person to ask. I go off of a lot of different random things. I'm trying to think like, okay, what are features that are instinctually appealing? There are a lot of game mechanics that are just instinctually, just the way that humans are wired. They're just really engaging. So I try and implement stuff like that into like the core of the games. At least like the more recent ones, like mostly Cuff Bus. For Choo Choo Charles, it wasn't as much of a priority. It's kind of a tough one. It's time, it's iteration, it's kind of just the general game development process. I'm gonna say, oh, this seems like it would be cool. I'll end in. If people, are playtesting and they agree, then great, I'll keep it. If not, I'm gonna make adjustments and kind of go from there.
How do you get playtesters? Just your process in general. For me, at least, I've taken advantage of the Seattle Indies and had just people play it during a show and tell. But do you have a different approach that you find is helpful?
I mean, honestly, it's just about getting people. I start out with family and friends, just having them try it out early on, and then when I'm getting closer to release, like with Choo Choo Charles, I used a site called GameTester.gg, I think, and on there you can pay however much keys, however many keys you want to have people test on, and then players will fill out a survey and just say what they did like, what they didn't like. You can have different survey questions and stuff like that. And so I think I had about 250 testers across a handful of different test groups in the last few months of development as I was kind of wrapping things up. And that was definitely useful.
So on the topic of virality as like a goal or like a way to get awareness on a project, what happens after that? Like, so if your goal is to go viral and say you want to get 100,000, 200,000, 500,000 people eyes on a project, what happens when you actually do go viral, and how do you plan for that? Do you have like a Discord server all spun up and waiting for a fresh 500,000 people to join? What's it like finding moderators for a community that size? Do you have social media posts queued up on channels that are ready for that influx of people, whether it happens or not? And did that go the way that you wanted it to go? And if not, how was that?
Personally, I think the main thing is just having a Steam page. Having a Steam page, trying to get wish lists, that's the main thing. I don't have a Discord server, and I don't plan to ever have a Discord server. Because again, the moderation of it just seems like a nightmare. It's not something that I want to deal with. And I don't think it doesn't, something like a Discord server specifically, you're not going to get more eyes on a game because you have a Discord server. It's simply a place for your existing community to talk about your game. And I don't necessarily see a ton of value in that. I'm sure for a lot of games that is valuable, probably more so for multiplayer stuff. And it's something that might not be like an awful idea. Something like Outclass, but for Charles, it just didn't seem relevant. I mean, I think when it comes to capturing the virality, the main thing is just the intention that, assuming it goes viral, you've got your calls to action in place, you've got your store page set up, you've got good marketing copy, you're pushing the wish list as much as you can, and trying to funnel it into a specific area. So I think that's kind of the main thing.
So I'm wondering, where did you get the idea for Cuff Bus? I know that prison break games are like popular on Roblox and Gmod. Did you like take inspiration from there, or whatever?
Yeah, for sure. So the prison break. Okay, so prison breaks are just a really good concept. It's something that has been proven in a lot of other media. Ultimately, my goal when I was trying to come up with an idea for a new game is I wanted it to be something that was multiplayer, something that was social, something that was replayable, something that had something that would be set up in a way where there was a clear goal, like where you could look at a screenshot and you could see, okay, this is generally what this game is about, and this is kind of how I would play it. And so something that has like clear, kind of pre-established context surrounding it. So if you see a screenshot of a prisoner character running away from a guard and there's prison bars around, you can kind of get an idea of what the game is. So that kind of instant familiarity is something that I was really looking for. And so one day I was just trying to think about concepts, and I thought about, or actually no, what it was is I was on SteamDB. I was looking up stats on some game or another, and I saw that Prison Architect was trending. And I was like, it would be really cool if there was just like a first person game where you could like escape from prisons. Like that would just be really cool. And then I was like, wait a minute, I could just make that. So I kind of put the idea through a bunch of different tests, just trying to think like, okay, has this idea worked in other mediums? And, obviously there are lots of prison break related games and prison related games that have done well, but not quite in the same way that Cuff Bust has been done. Cuff Bust is more of a casual multiplayer, social, that kind of a thing. And so I felt like there was an opening there that I could fit into really easily.
Cool. Thank you. I have a question on Choo Choo Charles. So Choo Choo Charles supports multi-platforms. So how was the technical process to support multi-platform? Like, was it challenge, or does Unreal Engine magically do the porting job, or did you need to go through a third-party contractor or company?
Yeah, so for the porting process, so I self-published on consoles, but I hired a studio to port it. So I worked with Warp Digital, and they're the same folks that I'm working with for the level editor on Cuff Bust. It took about 6 or 7 months. It was a bit of a process. It's not exactly magical. It definitely took some time. Working with the console platforms was also quite a pain. It was more difficult than I was just assuming it would be. Console publishing is kind of one of those things where like I feel like working with a publisher can be useful, because it is kind of a pain working with certification and all the different backends and getting everything set up back there. But yeah, it's a process that, if a game is big enough, I don't see why not, as long as it's something that's easy enough to port, single player stuff where you're not adding a lot of content. Obviously multiplayer is a bit more challenging when it comes to porting, but yeah.
All right, steal this again. So with such a big break between the initial PC release and then console porting taking months and then a secondary release, was that like a concern, or how much consideration was going towards whether or not you actually should port if the hook of your game is virality and just having that moment of excitement in that time and capturing that zeitgeist? What were your thoughts on like, okay, it's going to take this long to port it, what's going to happen when we have release 2?
Yeah, so it was something that I was a little bit unsure on. I figured I would probably at least break even, but by the time that it actually released, I was getting a little bit worried as to whether or not it actually would. I tried releasing some plushies with Makeship, and they didn't even get funded. And I was like, man, hype for this game has died off a lot. I don't even know if the console release is going to go well. It ended up going actually better than I was expecting it to. That being said, I still think, if I had done a simultaneous console and PC launch, I think consoles probably would have made as much as PC or more. Instead, consoles made, I think all consoles combined are maybe like 20% of the game's total revenue. I think that could have been a lot more if they had released, in unison. But it still did pretty well, surprisingly well. I think mostly just through, I don't know if people were just recognizing it on the storefronts. I think it got decent a decent push from the storefront algorithms. I don't know exactly how it went, but because I had a hard time marketing it that second time around, because like it had gone viral, the hype had died down. People were like, oh yeah, we've kind of already seen this before. But it seems like the storefronts pushed it decently well. If I was doing a single player game, I think so. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think in general, consoles are good. It just depends on what the game is and how time consuming or expensive it would be to port a particular game.
What are your thoughts on genre fatigue for that space with Five Nights, Indigo Park, Garden of Banban, Poppy Playtime? Are they oversaturating that market now? Do you think there could be another mascot that could be the next Huggy Wuggy, the next Fazbear? Is there space for another one?
Yeah, so there is definitely genre fatigue within the horror space. The horror space, you know, you used to be able to make hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars off of a decent, moderately well-made mascot horror styled game. These days, you have to put in so much more effort into the quality to stand out, because everybody's trying to do it now. Pretty much since Garden of Banban, everybody was, because Garden of Banban was kind of the first one that like really boiled everything down. And it was just like, okay, this is the most simplistic, like this is the core of this strategy. You got characters, you got the setting, you got all that stuff. And that made it look really approachable to everybody. So everybody hopped in on it. Yeah, I mean, basically anytime that a new subgenre crops up, it's only really going to be viable for a handful of games. You know, like when Vampire Survivors came out, obviously that one was massive. A handful of games follow it, or a lot of games follow it, but only a handful are really actually going to get, you know, decent exposure, because it's not going to be long before, you know, 2, 3, 4, 5 games pretty much satisfy all of the demand really well. It's like they've done pretty much all the different subtle variations that you can, and now the gameplay concept has basically been utilized. So I think within like the horror space, obviously you can make successful horror games, but you can't necessarily do like, oh, hey, here's a ripoff of Banban, or here's a ripoff of Poppy Playtime. You can't do the same thing anymore. It's got to be something very different. You know, horror genre is still be around, but not quite in that same way. I think that gold rush has kind of passed.
I'm sorry, last one. I guess, do you look at target market? I forget what I'm spacing out on the target market fit, I think. Like, is there a sweet spot for genres where like they're popular and there's like clearly an audience there, but they're not like, so like what you were saying with Vampire Survivors, there's like too many of them at that point and it gets too competitive. Like, do you look for like a middle ground for genres like that, or?
So it's kind of a tough one. I think if the strategy is to find a successful game that's kind of spawning a new genre, it's very, very difficult to try and follow that, because you're on a time crunch. Everybody's trying to follow that. So it's okay, who can make the highest quality game as fast as possible, which is just, it seems risky to me. It doesn't seem super viable long term. It doesn't seem like something that's super consistent, because then you also have to wait around for somebody to randomly make a massive hit game that you can copy. When it comes to genre viability, the main things that I'm looking for are more so like with Cuff Bust. I wasn't trying to see like, oh, is the prison break genre in gaming popular enough? Because there isn't necessarily a prison break genre. There are prison break related games, and that gave me some confidence that there was sort of some, you know, interest. But the main thing that I was looking at was other indicators, like, okay, these games are really, really big on Roblox. Prison Break skits were massive on in like Minecraft on YouTube 10 years ago. There's all the Prison Break TV shows and stuff like that. So I'm looking more for proof that the concept itself has some level of just innate familiarity just across a wide demographic, and that it's something that hasn't necessarily been exploited fully within the gaming space.
All good. Any more questions? No? All right. Well, thanks, Gavin and Coleman and Dan for running the session. Thanks, everybody. Thanks again to Paul for his talk earlier, and thanks everybody who's watching along at home on Twitch and YouTube. We have this space for at least another 30 minutes to hang out and chat, and thanks again for coming out. Check out seattleindies.org for all of our upcoming events, and hit up our Discord to connect with people that you met here tonight.
Oh, sorry.